Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And today we'll be discussing the case of a young mother who left her home one morning with her nephew to run a few errands, but neither of them ever returned. After only 12 hours, their car would be discovered abandoned, with both of their bodies found inside. Now, over 40 years later, with advancements in DNA technology, there's still hope that the killer, or killers, will be brought to justice. Today's case is about the murder of Lynn Vest and Jeremy Pickens. On Wednesday, November 12th, 1980, a 19-year-old woman by the name of Cheryl Buttons made the less than 2-mile drive to drop her 2.5-year-old son, Jeremy Pickens, off to her sister, 23-year-old Lynn Vest's home at 4012 East Fulton Street in Columbus, Ohio. You see, Lynn had been babysitting Jeremy for Cheryl and her husband for a little while now, as Lynn was a stay-at-home mom. She had the time to be able to watch Jeremy, and it wasn't a problem for her at all. Lynn had previously worked as an assistant for a dentist in Reynoldsburg, which was only about a 20-minute drive away from her home, but I believe after she had her son, Shane, who was 1 year old at the time, she decided to stay home with him. Regardless, Lynn loved her nephew, plus Jeremy and Shane would be able to spend their days playing and having a grand old time, so it seemed to be a win-win situation. It was also convenient because Lynn's husband, Dennis Vest, was home throughout the day as well, as he worked second shift, so roughly 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., at the Emory Air Freight Facility at Port Columbus. The pair had been married for the last 4 years, so roughly since 1976. Now, sometime before 11 a.m. that morning on the 12th, Lynn told her husband that she was going to run a couple of errands around town. She needed to go to the bank, specifically Ohio State Bank, to cash a couple of checks, and she also planned to buy a few items for their bathroom at a nearby Woolco store. Now, I had never heard of Woolco before, and it appears to have been a retail chain type store, similar to the Walmarts or Targets of today. So, roughly around this 11 a.m. time frame, Lynn was packing up her purse and throwing on her coat as she was getting ready to head out the door. She planned to bring her 1-year-old son Shane, as well as Jeremy, with her to run these errands. However, according to Holly Zachariah's reporting for the Columbus Dispatch, Shane was just not feeling it that day and seemed to be in need of a nap instead of going out to run these errands. So Lynn put Shane down for a nap, kissed her husband goodbye, grabbed Jeremy, and the two hopped into the family's only vehicle, a blue 1979 Mustang Cobra hatchback, and headed off into town. Now, I just mentioned that this was the Vest family's only car, so Lynn would have to be back prior to 3 p.m. for her husband to make it on time for his shift that afternoon. But Dennis wasn't worried about that, though. His wife was incredibly conscientious and would never be late, and in turn make him late for work.
Better hope there's no inclement weather.
This is true. I mean, it was literally right around this time right now.
Mm-hmm.
In Ohio.
I'm sure it can snow in Ohio.
Oh, I'm sure. I just heard recently it was snowing in Kentucky. But, I feel like us in this northern region are pretty good with snow.
Yeah.
But then again, I don't know how good.
Well, I'm just thinking a Fox Body Mustang Cobra is going to be rear-wheel drive.
That did not go into my brain. That makes sense, yeah.
It's probably not going to do too well in the snow, but
well,
I'm sure
spoiler
that's not
alert,
a problem here.
There's no snow.
Okay.
So the afternoon continued to drag on, and Lynn didn't call. She didn't come home. She was nowhere to be found. And Dennis began to feel this panicky feeling in his gut. And then 3 p.m. came and went, and his wife and nephew still hadn't come home. And that's when he knew something was up, obviously, because at this point he's now late for work. He has no way of getting there, so he took action. He actually called up Lynn's father, Don, to see if he might be able to help him figure out where his wife and nephew were. Which, mind you, Don was also Jeremy's grandfather. Now, Don at the time was actually a detective with 17 years under his belt with the Columbus Police Department. And more specifically, at least in the last few years, he'd been working within the burglary division. Obviously, Dennis phoning Don was definitely the right call to make, and Don got to work to get his daughter and grandson reported missing. It's reported that when Don received the call from Dennis about the fact that Lynn and Jeremy were missing, he was actually already at the police department. He must have been on shift, I would guess. So he went right to where he needed to go to file a missing persons report. Yet, they literally tried to give him, a seasoned detective with the Columbus Police Department, the old, "Oh, don't worry, they'll show up soon" line. Can you imagine?
Yeah, I mean, luckily Don was a seasoned detective, so I'm sure he could tell him no.
Yeah.
Like, listen here, this is odd. It's not common for my daughter to do this.
Yep.
We need to enter her in. So not everybody always has that direct link to an active police officer to get shit done like this.
Yeah, true. So, like, if Don wasn't a cop and Dennis was worried about his wife, what would they have told him? Like, oh, too bad, you can't go anywhere, you don't have a car, and we're not going to do anything for you for the next 24 hours at least.
Right, and what would he have done? He couldn't have done anything besides search for himself.
Exactly. Well, like you said, John, Don was not going to let that fly. He knew how these things worked, and this was his daughter and grandson they're talking about. There was absolutely no way he wasn't going to get this report put in and immediately start searching for the two of them. Don told the Columbus Dispatch in regards to his reaction to being told that he should wait to report them missing, quote, "I told them, don't give me that shit," end quote.
That's exactly what I would say.
Yes, exactly. I'm like, there's no way in my mind, or probably anyone's mind, that someone that works within the police department would ever in a million years let them be like, yeah, you're right. They'll show up. It's fine.
Right.
There's no way.
Like, if Don didn't say that to Dennis, and Don just took the information and was like, I'll get him put in as missing, then Don's not going to be the type to just be like, oh, yeah, you're right. Let's just wait.
Exactly. Yep. So after the two were officially reported missing that afternoon, authorities were to be on the lookout for Lynn, who was described as 5 feet 6 inches tall, with blue eyes and blonde hair, and was last seen wearing a ski jacket and blue jeans. Also to be on the lookout for Jeremy, who was described as having blonde hair and was last seen wearing a blue hooded jacket and blue pants. And lastly, they would also be looking for the blue 1979 Ford Mustang the two were last seen leaving the East Fulton Street house in. Now, it's not entirely clear what took place for the next several hours, who was out searching, or how intensive a search was even taking place. But later on that night, on the 12th, just before midnight, like literally 11:55 p.m. is when it's reported as, two patrolmen, Officer Martin and Officer Garvin, were just doing routine patrolling in the area of East Main Street and Berkeley Street in Columbus. From how I understand it, they were not a part of any formal search effort for Lynn and Jeremy. However, the two had driven by this particular area and spotted what looked like Lynn's car in the very back of a vacant parking lot. When the two officers got out of their cruiser and approached the dark vehicle, they were met with a shock when they opened up the car. They had found the bodies of both Lynn and little Jeremy inside the vehicle, covered with a white sheet as well as a blue towel. Early reporting on this case stated that Jeremy was tucked in behind one of the front seats, with his body being covered by the towel, and Lynn's body was more so in the trunk or hatchback area of the car with that white sheet covering her. Where the car was found was said to be roughly 4 miles east of the bank where Lynn had planned to visit late that Wednesday morning. And John, I do have an aerial view photo from Google Maps of where I believe this vacant lot where the car was found is. Obviously, I think it probably looks a bit different today, but I believe this is the lot where it was found. And for all those listening, these photos will be on our socials and our website.
Okay, I understand the general area. It's just hard if this is a current map to know what was there 40 years ago.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely tough.
Okay.
So from here, the initial investigation into Lynn and Jeremy's murders would begin, with the Columbus PD taking lead in the investigation. And they were absolutely taking this case very seriously, with the Springfield News-Sun reporting that 20 detectives had been assigned to this case, when the normal amount of detectives to be assigned to any murder case in Columbus at the time was only 6. And I do just want to mention that no, Don, Lynn's father and Jeremy's grandfather, was not one of the detectives assigned to work this case.
Yeah, I think it'd be too close. Kind of a conflict of interest.
Yeah, it just brings me back to Gary Grant Jr. every time we talk about that. I'm like, that was definitely a conflict of interest.
Right. When you have a crime that is committed that affects you on a personal level, it's a very bad call to have you involved in that investigation, at least in an official capacity.
Oh, it's so true. And Don has in recent years been interviewed by people, and he's been very honest about his feelings on everything. And he flat out said, like, when they told him that they had been found murdered, they had to take his gun from him. They had to, control him. He has said that he, thanks God every day, in a way, for, how everything has gone in this case, because he knows he would have killed someone. He was planning it out. I will murder whoever did this in this way.
Right.
He did not care. And I'm like, you know what? Honesty is the best policy. At least he's telling people what he was thinking. And I feel like we would all feel that way too.
Yeah, when he's reflecting on it, it's easy to say that we'd probably all feel the same way.
Exactly.
And whereas he may have not agreed with the decision at the time, looking back on it in retrospect, it's easier to say, okay, it was probably the right call, and I thank the people that were involved for doing that. But if I went back in time, I may do the same thing anyway. I wouldn't have changed my feelings on it.
Also, before we really dive into the initial investigation, I just want to give a massive shout out to an individual on Web Sleuths with the username, I think it's pronounced Neuro or Nero Sleuth. It's Nero Sleuth. And
I would say Nero Sleuth.
Okay.
Neuro would be Neuro.
Yeah, you're right. So Nero Sleuth.
Nero Sleuth.
I would like to give a shout out to this person. I would have been completely without, honestly, any of the initial reporting on this case if this person hadn't gone to, physically gone to, the Columbus Library and looked through the microfilm there and gotten all the early records on this case. Because Archives of the Columbus Dispatch, which is the publication that reported on this case the most in the beginning, you can't get any of those prior to 1985 online. You can only get any records prior to 85 physically within the library in Columbus, Ohio, on their microfilm. But this Web Sleuths user took the time to go to the library. I assume he probably lives nearby, but I'm saying I'm not really sure. But this person went and found every single article and typed them all out and put them into this whole Web Sleuths thread on Lynn and Jeremy's cases. And I will say there is good news because I'm a fact checker, and I was actually able to verify one of the articles that he had put on his post with one, literally the one and only Columbus Dispatch piece that I could find. And it was randomly a photo that was uploaded on findagrave.com, and it matched up perfectly to what he had typed up in his post. So I have faith in the fact that this user actually did their due diligence and put accurate information within the thread. But that's all. I just wanted to give that shout out before, obviously you're not going to see within any of my sources those specific articles because I could not access them. You're going to see a source to his thread.
Right.
So.
Okay.
But anyway, as always, let's start with the scene and what investigators found when they arrived. For starters, we already discussed how the two had been partially concealed in the abandoned vehicle by both a blue towel and a white sheet. It's unclear if these two items were already in Lynn's car or if they'd been brought by the perpetrator. Outside of that, authorities discovered two big things that could potentially later lead to a motive. One, Lynn's wedding ring was missing. And two, her purse with her credit cards as well as cash that she'd taken out at the bank was missing.
So first off, you're thinking robbery.
That's exactly where my head goes. Yep.
Okay.
It's later discovered that Lynn had actually deposited 2 checks when she stopped at the Ohio State Bank, but she'd also taken out over $100 in cash as well. And based on that same reporting for the Columbus Dispatch by Holly Zachariah, the exact amount was $126, which today would amount to approximately $455. So that's definitely a fair amount of cash to have on your person. Once authorities realized that Lynn's purse and valuable wedding ring were no longer with her, that obviously prompted detectives working the case to at least begin to believe that maybe robbery could have been the motive, but they weren't going to hang their hats on that just yet. Regardless, a description of Lynn's purse was actually released to the public, I assume in hopes that if someone found it, they'd come forward with it. It was described as a, quote, beige, heavy weave cloth purse with a shoulder strap, end quote. And it was also stated in several Columbus Dispatch pieces written on this case that Lynn also had a personalized keychain in her bag with her name on it. So I assume if anybody found it, they would be able to easily identify that it was hers.
Well,
hopefully.
If those keys are in the purse.
Yep.
But at least I'm thinking right now that if this car was left at the back of an abandoned lot, she did not drive it there.
Correct.
And if she was leaving a bank, and with very little information that we have right now, somebody's looking for a crime of opportunity, and robbery is the number one motive right now, as far as
what we know. Yep.
You would think that she was attacked leaving the bank, and then you have her wedding ring taken and other valuables and stuff. So I was just thinking that this personalized keychain may not be with the purse.
Oh, they could have just like dumped it or whatever, like ripped everything out of there and like thrown it or whatever.
Yeah, potentially. You're just...
I mean, it's a keychain though. Like what if it was like attached? Like it could have been attached on the inside. I'm just thinking of things like, why would police tell the public, hey, this is a bag we're looking for. Here's some easily identifiable things about it.
Yeah.
You know, that was just kind of where I was thinking.
I suppose. I was just kind of connecting it to where the vehicle was located, the motive that we're currently working. It's easier to pull a print off of a metal key than it would be some type of cloth bag or anything else. So.
Okay.
But then again,
I think both ways we're looking at it are good ways to think about it. So.
But then people that are committing crimes like this don't necessarily always think, if it's a crime of opportunity, they're not worried about covering their tracks the best that they can. But.
Yes, exactly.
All right.
So a few other things that were found in the car were a car seat, which I assume was probably Shane's, but Jeremy had likely used it as Lynn didn't bring Shane along on their trip to run errands that day. Lynn's coat was also found in the car, but I can't tell if this was the coat she wore that day, like when she left the house, or if this was maybe an extra one that she left in the car. And the only other thing I've seen reported that was found in the 79 Mustang was a rubber ball, assumably probably Jeremy's. Or Shane's, but yeah. All right, so something authorities didn't find in the vehicle was any sign of a struggle, which at this point led investigators to believe that Lynn and Jeremy had not been killed in the car. They were likely murdered in another location, were placed in the vehicle after the fact, and then the car was left in this lot set far back off the road. Now, in terms of any physical evidence authorities found in the car, very early reporting indicated that whoever did this had potentially wiped down the inside of the vehicle or could have even worn gloves to avoid getting their prints on anything, because pretty much no fingerprints were found in the car at all. Which
completely
is the opposite of what you just said. I was
just saying.
Yeah.
Chances are most times people committing these crimes aren't always thinking. But it is also November. It could be frigging freezing in Columbus, Ohio.
It's friggin' freezing here, so it's totally possible.
They could have been wearing gloves, and it just happened to be a coincidence at the time.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. Authorities did also examine and test, I believe, both the sheet and the towel that had covered Lynn and Jeremy's bodies, but from what I can tell, no valuable evidence was gathered on either of those items, at least early on in this case.
I'm wondering if there's any information about seat position.
That's something that's never been stated.
Really?
Really, yeah.
Because, you're talking Lynn being 5'6". She's attacked by an average-sized male, 5'9", 5'10", probably.
Yeah.
Seat position is going to be different.
Yeah,
I'm a Fox body Cobra Mustang is probably a manual.
Yes, you are correct about that.
So seat position is going to...
Like being able to reach the clutch and all of that.
Right.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting point to bring up. And I like that you're thinking about these things, because when I found out that this car was a manual, it wasn't anything that would have popped into my head. I always thought it's like, oh, you can get both versions of every car, but that's totally not necessarily true.
Yeah.
So
I was actually making an assumption, because I'm sure you can probably get, like, at least nowadays, you could probably get like an automatic.
Yeah.
Higher end Mustang.
Well, it was a good assumption, because it's
79 Cobra.
Yeah.
I doubt you're getting an automatic, so.
Yeah. Very interesting. All right. So outside of the sheet and the towel, authorities also collected some evidence from the car. Not really sure what it was. I do know that some items were sent off to the lab, but in terms of this initial investigation, and especially with it being 1980, you're not really having DNA or anything like that on investigators' minds. So that's really all I know up front in regards to what was collected pretty much right off the bat at the scene. So now we're going to move on to the autopsy results. The ME at the time was Franklin County Coroner William Adrian, and there were actually some contradictory reports in the early days regarding the results of what this coroner was able to uncover from the autopsies. But I'll tell you what I know, and then I'll give you some of the information that, at least to me, appeared to be a bit inconsistent. So, for starters, Lynn's cause of death was labeled as strangulation with an object, and that object was said to potentially be a thin cord that was wrapped twice around her neck. There were also later comments in a few Columbus Dispatch articles that Lynn had, quote, deep indentations on her neck, and that appeared to be how the ME was able to determine how she was strangled and with what type of item. It was stated in a Columbus Dispatch piece, though, that, quote, nothing that might have been used in the killings was found in the blue 1979 Ford Mustang, end quote. So to me, that means the ME determined what type of object strictly based on the markings he found on Lynn's body, and then what he described as being the murder weapon just wasn't found in the car.
So if I'm following this correctly, if it's a thin cord and they said it was wrapped around her neck twice,
yep.
Are they saying that there are markings around her entire neck?
That's what I think, because how else would you determine how many times it's wrapped around her neck unless you have fully around essentially two thin lines in those indentations from each part of the cord?
Or the markings are on the front half of her neck and it's two lines.
Yeah, that could be possible as well.
But then I think back to another case that we covered. Actually, it's not really a case, but our Halloween episode. Where I forget his name because, I'm terrible with names. But I'm good with details. The iron cord.
Oh,
when you
yes.
When you think of, a general power cord, I think, I'm not an electrician, you have a positive and a negative cord going through. If you were to strangle somebody with a cord like that.
If it weren't covered in the rubber?
No, if it was covered in the rubber, it could leave two lines.
Oh, yeah. I wonder, but when I think thin, I think like fishing wire, like something like that is what I think of when I think of a thin cord. Whereas something that would be maybe like of a thicker material would be like an electrical cord or a rope or something like that.
I agree with that. I think when compiling reports, if you're going to use, a semi-ambiguous term such as thin.
Yeah, that's definitely tough.
You may want to put a measurement in on it.
Yeah, like less than.
Because for thin for me, maybe I'm thinking 5 millimeters.
But thin for this coroner might be...
Could be 1 millimeter.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point to make. But also one of those things where it's like, do you give everything you have as, investigators, this is what we've got from the autopsy, or do you keep it ambiguous on purpose so that someone can't come forward and say, oh, I used an electrical cord, whereas the real murder weapon is something much thinner, like a fishing wire or something like that.
Yeah, or some type of thin rope or
something. Exactly. So I think maybe it kind of helps with the integrity of the investigation a little bit.
Because you're withholding certain specifics.
Yeah.
That, you release a lot of information to the public, but you keep these tiny little tidbits close to the chest. That way
you can weed out the
BS.
The liars who like to just confess to everything. Also, before we move on to Jeremy's autopsy, I did just want to mention that Lynn was found fully clothed in the car and that there was no indication that she had been sexually assaulted. So again, this is just another thing that keeps bringing me back to robbery as the motive.
Either robbery or a professional style killing for some reason.
Interesting that you think that.
It's just, you can rob somebody without killing them.
This is true.
It doesn't seem like they got a ton of money or valuables.
This is also true. I don't really have too much of an opinion to give on that yet. Let's dive into a little bit more.
I'm 50-50 on it. Like robbery seems almost too apparent.
That's true.
She was leaving a bank. The car was still somewhat close to the bank. Money's gone, valuables are gone. If somebody was doing this professionally and wanted to send investigators in a different direction or make them seem like, oh, is clearly a robbery gone bad.
Yeah.
That's what you do. You make it look that way.
You'd stage it that way. Yeah. And especially considering...
It's like in the middle of the morning.
Yeah, it's literally the middle of the
late
day.
Morning.
Yeah.
People all around. This woman and child are going to get abducted and killed probably
in the middle of the day.
Yeah. Right. Like, it doesn't seem like they were taken somewhere and then At least, I know that's still a possibility.
So far, yeah.
Right. It doesn't seem like they were taken somewhere and then brought back to a location where they just were.
Yeah. No, I totally see what you're saying.
To dump the car.
Yeah.
But.
I think as we keep going, maybe you'll pick one side versus the other.
Mm. So
Jeremy's cause of death was determined to be suffocation. It's unclear if the offender used their hands or an object to suffocate him, though. He was also found fully clothed, and there was no indication of sexual assault for him either. Now, in terms of the time of death, this is one of the things that's a bit fuzzy. I saw 2 different reports, and I feel like they're very different. One stated that the two had been deceased for roughly 12 hours prior to when their bodies were found, which would put their time of death roughly between 11:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. on that Wednesday, the 12th, which is pretty much right around the time that she went to the bank. However, there was one other report I found that stated the time of death for both Lynn and Jeremy was around 5 p.m. I'm unsure which is more accurate, but based on some information I'm going to give you later, I personally tend to lean more towards the earlier time frame, but we'll get into that in a little bit.
And I'm sorry, maybe if our listeners are like me and they didn't grasp it at the beginning either. The time that she left the house?
Right around 11 a.m.
11 a.m. And the date and time the bodies were found?
Literally the same day, just before midnight. So pretty much 13 hours, I would say, after they were last seen at home.
Okay.
But we're going to dive into sightings of her and a more clear time frame in just a few minutes.
Okay, but we're not talking a day difference or anything. It is same day within 12 to 13 hours.
Correct.
All right.
Also, just a minute ago, I had mentioned how there were some contradictory, inconsistent comments regarding the autopsies. So one of the first things that I found had to do with comments regarding bruising on both Lynn and Jeremy's necks. Obviously, we know that Jeremy was suffocated. That was the final cause of death. But I don't know about any other potential injuries there, why the ME might have noted that. There were some articles that stated that there was bruising on both of their necks, but then there were others that literally flat out said, nope, there was no bruising, no other indications or marks or anything on their bodies whatsoever. So for me, if I had to guess, I would think that the comment that there is bruising is more accurate, especially considering those indentations that were found on Lynn's neck. You would assume that those were probably bruised. But for me, it just is frustrating when you have like completely contradictory statements by essentially the same publication. I believe these were all within the Columbus Dispatch, yet they literally are the complete opposite of each other. So which is it?
Well, I mean, if you had to hang your hat on one or the other, I would probably lean more towards there was bruising.
Yeah, exactly. Me too. Another thing that I found particularly interesting, still kind of in the same vein of the autopsy and physical evidence and those kinds of things, had to do with testing of Lynn and Jeremy's clothes that they were wearing that day. It was stated that there were no bodily substances, no dirt, no debris, sand, grass, or really anything that could indicate much to investigators or the ME where the two were killed. And due to the lack of physical evidence or any sort of substances found on them, that led investigators to believe that the two had at least not been on the ground when they were killed. That's like specifically how it was stated. They were not on the ground. And I don't really know how much that can kind of give you in terms of deciphering the location of where their murders might have taken place, but I figured it would at least be something good to bring up.
That leads me more to believe, like, why I was kind of talking about the professional hit or murder type deal is, you know, you have an unsuspecting female and a young child, you come up behind them and strangle her.
I see what you're saying. Yep.
Seems like
a quick,
it's
precise
not like,
attack rather than like this
hey,
heat of the moment, getting beat up or some sort of fight or something like that.
Exactly. It's like this seems like it was one purpose and it was to kill her, and you're probably not going to leave this kid
as a potential witness
or anything. I mean, what would a 2.5-year-old remember or be able to give you for information? But it just seems too clean of a scene and a murder. No other injuries besides like some bruising to their necks. From when we first started diving into cause of death, I really thought, you know, somebody coming up behind her and strangling her with an object, unsuspecting.
I can completely
So not
see
a
where
roll
you're
around
coming
on the
from.
ground, not a beat
Yes.
up, not a, hey, give me your money.
Mm-hmm.
No, you're not going to give me your money. All right, I'm going to, wrestle you for your purse. And then when you don't give it to me, I'm going to strangle you. It's like, no.
Yep.
This person had this thing.
And this was like the
This was
intention
their
and this
goal.
is the plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. All right, so the next thing I want to cover in terms of the initial investigation would be any sightings of Lynn and Jeremy the day they were killed and the witness statements that went along with any of those sightings. Authorities obviously wanted to retrace Lynn's movements that day to see if they could pin down a more definitive time frame on when they were abducted, when the murder would have occurred, and when the car was dumped. So I want to first start out by describing Lynn's vehicle, because this became a pretty big sticking point in the beginning of this investigation in terms of finding witnesses who may have seen the two because the car was so unique. Obviously, we first know that it's a 1979 Ford Mustang Cobra hatchback.
Right, so we're talking essentially top of the line muscle version of your standard Mustang.
Correct.
And it's a 79 and we're talking 1980, so it's brand spanking new.
Yes, and it's a more uncommon color with it being blue. It's not black or white or silver, which I feel like I hear about more often. But now that I drive a blue car, I feel like it's, But
you never realize how many there are out there until you start driving one
oh
yourself.
my God, it's so true. It's so
I had
true.
a white Mustang before, white Mustang GT. It was
Must
an
have been
03.
everywhere once you got it.
Before I had it, I was like, oh, that's beautiful. You
Such
never
a
see it.
unique car. No
And
one's
then you
going to
start
have
driving it, and it's like Mustang.
Yep.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. The other thing about this car, though, that's like really distinct has to do with the way, I guess it's the way that Lynn's mother described the car. So Lynn's mother described the car for the Columbus Dispatch as a, quote, two-door with an air scoop on the hood and Cobra written in white letters on the sides, end quote.
It's a car that's going to stand out amongst the masses of standard vehicles.
Exactly.
Even nowadays, if we're driving down the street, like you'd be able to remember if, a blue and potentially white Cobra was driving down the street
Definitely.
versus
A Toyota Camry.
Right.
Yeah, I would absolutely recognize that more. So that's like why this was a sticking point where it's like, if you saw this car, you saw this woman,
Right.
and we need you to come forward. So it's a very obvious vehicle, and pretty much all of these sightings or witness statements would be more than like,
even
would
if
be
you just,
accurate.
Yes, even if you just saw the vehicle
Yeah,
and you saw some other person driving it,
exactly.
you need to come
Yes.
forward because this is not, your typical run-of-the-mill, see it every day type vehicle.
Yeah, like you're not going to mix up this car.
I understand what she's saying.
Yeah, okay. So we know that Lynn's plan was to run to the bank, then she was going to go to the Woolco store. She was said to have left her home on East Fulton Street right around 11 a.m., like we talked about before, and she was, in fact, seen in the drive-through lane of the Ohio State Bank at 11:15 a.m. on the 12th. She had deposited those two checks and took out the $126 in cash, again, like we talked about before. After the bank, Lynn made her way over to the Woolco store, which was located within the Great Eastern Shopping Center on the corner of South Hamilton Road and Main Street. So all the places she'd gone to were all pretty close by and on the same street because South Hamilton Road actually comes up a lot. That's the same road that the bank was on as well. So it's like she was hitting all these little points within like just this one stretch of road, it seemed, that morning.
And what time was she seen at Woolco?
So we're going to get into that in a minute, but it was roughly around 11:30. Latest would be around noon. So I would assume she probably
Next
left
stop.
the bank, next stop, got into the parking lot. Obviously, you've got a toddler with you. It's a process dealing with getting them in and out of a vehicle. Probably takes a few minutes. And then she was seen in the store by both employees and customers between that 11:30 and noon time frame. One customer actually stated that she saw Lynn at the store holding some sort of package, but I don't know if this package was like something that she brought in from somewhere else, or if this was something she like had in her hands that she was like heading to the register to try to buy, or maybe she had already purchased this item and it was like in a bag and she was on her way out the store. But I will say it's later reported that whatever she was seen carrying was not found in her car when it was later located in that vacant lot.
That's such a weird term to use, though. I saw her carrying a package.
That's what I thought too. I was like, did she go to the post office? Like, that didn't make sense. I would think like, oh, she had a bag with the things she bought in.
Right. She either had a product that she was purchasing in her hand
Yep.
or a bag because she had just made a purchase.
Exactly.
Unless Woolco had some type of mailing service
I don't
inside
know.
and maybe she was planning to mail it.
Maybe? I don't know. I just thought that was like a weird comment.
Yeah. It's a strange word to use to describe what she was carrying.
Yeah.
If it was not something that was either received from a mailing service or being brought to.
Yeah, because anytime I think of the word package, I think something that is being mailed. I don't think of, I just bought this package of goods at the store. I mean, I don't
just
know.
shipped my drawers. Packages.
Is that a thing?
Well, packages made me think ship.
Mm-hmm.
And then ship made me think of the Kmart commercial from around this time of year. Where everybody's
Oh,
like,
yes.
I can ship my pants?
Yes.
I can ship my pants.
I remember that. That's a funny commercial.
They also have a Christmas version of it, too.
You've definitely showed me this before. Yeah. It's all coming back in my head now. I can like envision the characters in the
I just like the guy at the end. He's like, I just shipped my bed.
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's too funny. Also, in Holly Zachariah's reporting for the Columbus Dispatch, it was reported that an employee saw Lynn in the Woolco store, and this employee said that Lynn had purchased a juice box for Jeremy while she was there. I highly doubt this person is mistaking a package in a juice box, so...
You can buy a single juice box?
Well, like I said, it's like a Walmart or a Target. Like, you would think it would probably be, like, up at the registers like it is today, where you can get, like, a Diet Coke or a Monster. I'm sure they had, like, juice boxes for little kids back in 80, you know?
Unless this person was confusing the package for a, strip.
See, I don't think so, because it was specifically stated in this reporting that she bought him a juice box for 45 cents.
Oh, okay, so it's not a strip of juice boxes.
Exactly. If you could get like 6 juice boxes for 45 cents, that'd be pretty cool, but I highly doubt it. So
$45 nowadays.
Honestly, it's true. But anyway, from what I can tell, in the early days of the investigation, this was all police had in terms of sightings of Lynn and Jeremy. So with what we know, that would have been the last sighting at noon. So then they are found pretty much exactly 12 hours from that, at least based on what we know so far. My guess up front is that authorities knew more than they were saying in the early days of this investigation.
In regards to what?
The last sightings of Lynn.
Okay.
I think that they knew more, that they kept it close to the chest because they wanted to protect the integrity of their investigation, because there just wasn't a lot to go off of. Like, how could she have been seen in these places, but then she's just all of a sudden, poof, not seen, and the car's not seen again until midnight when it's found by the cops? That just didn't jive with me in the beginning. I'm like, there's got to be more.
Sure. So that's what you were thinking in the beginning.
Correct.
And that's pretty much probably what we're thinking now, and most of our listeners are thinking now.
Yes.
But I'm sensing that there is more that we find out later that police probably knew at this time.
Pretty much, yeah. But we're not going to get into that for a little bit. I have a lot more other stuff to tell you.
So just to touch on that map again that you sent me.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know how, based on this map, how built up the infrastructure was comparatively.
Correct. We actually are going to dive into that.
Okay, but I'm just saying, this is like a densely populated area. Mm-hmm. This vehicle probably wouldn't drive down the street without being seen by somebody.
That's exactly what I would think, yes. And we'll touch on it in a little bit, but I'll tell you now, there was a restaurant over there, there was an apartment complex over there, and there was a liquor store over there. And I also believe there was maybe possibly a grocery store. So, I mean, it wasn't like in the middle of nowhere, like, just to go back to Sherry Magaro's case as an example, in the middle of a field. Where nobody was around. That is not this area. I mean, this is Columbus, Ohio. Yeah,
and I mean, we're also thinking the glory days, 80s and 90s, early 2000s, before people's heads were always buried in their cell phones.
Yes.
Everybody's looking around. People are more into the moment. Things don't pass by as easily.
Exactly. You're going to notice things.
Are gonna see shit.
If you're looking for people that have seen something, if you're looking for witnesses back in 1980, you're going to be better off than you are in 2022.
You'll have more people that probably saw something. Whether or not they want to come forward is another story.
Yes, completely agree with that. So we've already talked about sightings of Lynn and Jeremy, but we haven't touched on sightings of the car, because obviously that was the big thing. Neither of these people that saw her at the bank or the Woolco were talking about seeing Lynn in her car or seeing her car in general. So there were some witnesses that did come forward that spoke to investigators to let them know of when they actually first saw the car in the lot where it was found. But the frustrating thing about those witnesses that came forward is that they literally gave the most varying of times of when they first saw the Mustang in that lot, just abandoned there. The first sighting and the earliest sighting was said to be around 3:30 p.m., and then the last sighting was said to be around 11 p.m. So you have this crazy wide window of time. Obviously, the car is easily identifiable. Were people confusing when they first saw it? Was the 3:30 accurate? And then there were people who came by that location later and later in the day and kept seeing it between that time frame.
That's what I would have to assume.
Yeah, so then is 3:30 accurate? And maybe things happened between when she was seen at noon at the Woolco and then when the first sighting of the car is at 3:30.
I think it's tough to estimate that without knowing more information about the area.
Yeah.
The type of people that came forward with information saying that they saw it. You know, if it's 3:30 and a kid walking home from school saw the car.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, you know, he got out of school, he walked home, whatever, and they saw the car at that point.
Yep.
Is this an area that, like, there was nothing around and nobody should really be able to find it unless they were looking for it or unless they were going to this area for a reason? You say it's abandoned. So I would have to assume that 3:30 time, somebody probably saw it there.
Yeah, if no one saw it before that, if
Right.
3:30 is just the very earliest that anybody in that area had spotted that car there.
All you can say is the car was probably there at that point.
Exactly.
You can't assume that it was there any earlier, but now you have a window of potentially, 11:30 to noon when Lynn was last seen at the Woolco, and that 3:30 time.
Yeah.
Were there any other sightings elsewhere prior to that? Or could that car very well have been sitting in an abandoned lot for 3 hours?
Very possible. Who knows?
I'm
I know.
sure somebody
We'll tell
knows.
you later. Also, I did just want to mention, too, that in terms of the area where the car was found, I have seen it discussed here and there online that the area was not the nicest or the safest. So I don't really know how that goes into things because it was like 4 miles east of where she was last seen. Was this spot picked out specifically because of that? Or was it just like somewhere where the perpetrators felt comfortable? Or was it just along their way? Or who knows? But
Or was it a place where if somebody dumped a car, nobody would call the police to say anything about it?
yeah, that's a good point to make as well.
Like, are you going to go to the, ghetto of a city and dump a car where people aren't worried about saying to the police, oh, it's weird that this car is here? They're more interested in, trying to ransack the car.
Yeah. I
So
see
if
that.
this is not a great place where it was dropped, that was probably put there specifically for the reason that most people in that area don't want to call the police.
They're not going to go looking.
They're not going to talk to the
question.
police.
Yeah.
Right. So
Makes sense.
again, that goes to, seems like it was a planned attack.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like it was a planned location where to drop it. It was close enough to where she was last seen that it's not like you're going to be seen driving 5 towns over and all these people are going to see you driving this vehicle.
Yep.
It's quick enough to get there and drop the car off. So who knows? I'm interested to know more.
Well, I got a lot more for you. So now I want to dive into the miscellaneous category of the initial investigation, which this time, for this case, is also going to include motive and certain ideas and theories that were floating around at the time. So first of all, I do want to mention that authorities did look into Dennis, who was Lynn's husband, and they looked into his personal life, his financial records, all of that, just to make sure there was nothing weird going on. And they found absolutely nothing. They also did the same with Don, Lynn's father.
I was going to say this. He's a seasoned detective. Has he locked people up? Did he make enemies?
Well, he was working in the burglary division as well. So this was something that was running through my mind in the beginning as well. And not only did they look into his professional life, they looked into his personal life. They were vetting everybody. And I think that is commendable, considering that he is a fellow police officer. And for them to look into him like that, just to be sure that it's not anything that had happened in his professional life, regardless, that could have pushed somebody to want to harm his family.
And I mean, knowing his mindset off the get-go of all of this taking place,
Yeah.
I'm sure he's running through his mind as he's planning to go after someone. is it somebody that I've arrested? Is it an enemy that I've made?
Absolutely.
How am I going to find this person? So
Definitely.
outside of all these other investigators looking at Don and, picking apart his life,
I'm sure
both
he's
personal and
doing the same.
Right, private, he's doing the same.
Exactly. Which authorities did say they found nothing. Not one single thing to indicate that it had anything to do with anyone's personal lives, anyone's professional lives. Seemed like, at least how I'm gathering it, a complete stranger.
So nothing to do with Miss Buttons?
No, nothing to do with Cheryl. Nope.
Interesting.
They looked into all family. They looked into everyone, it seemed. I mean, again, there could always be things that they're not saying.
Or that they haven't been able to find.
Yes, exactly. That's totally possible as well. But I do just want to touch on one more time the whole thing with, potentially Don's profession being involved here, even though authorities are saying, oh, there's nothing that we found. His whole family, too, same thing. They were like, nope, there's no way. We don't think it has anything to do with his job. And even Jeremy's father stated, quote, I really don't think revenge had anything to do with it, end quote. It's like the whole family, everyone was just thinking this had to have been a stranger, which then leads us to the next idea, which again is what I've been talking about since the beginning, robbery. And this was actually something that I thought about early on, before I had dug into more details on this case. What popped into my head in the very beginning, before I knew that she had taken cash out, before I knew anything, was Lynn is driving a very nice, very new, very well cared for sports car. I was thinking along the lines of robbery at first, strictly because maybe whoever did this believed she had money because of the type of car that she was driving. Yeah. So was she targeted for that reason? Obviously, these people were like, oh, cool, you've got this ring and you've got this cash and you've got these credit cards that I'm going to steal from you. But maybe they were, sorely mistaken to
hoping
say,
for more.
Yeah, maybe they were thinking that she had a lot more on her than she did because of this car that she was driving. And that's actually something that Lynn's stepfather had mentioned in one article on this case, that he thought maybe she was targeted because of the car that she was driving. And I was like, wow, okay, so I'm not totally crazy thinking this. Other people in the family are thinking that this is a possibility as well.
Which I can agree with that. If you are a criminal and you're trying to profile your next victim that you're going to take advantage of or go after and attack.
Yep.
But I don't know. Something about this case is just too clean. If they were targeting her because of the vehicle and they got her personal belongings, but then put her and Jeremy in the car and then dump the car, if the car was their, shining star that directed them
to pick her. Yeah.
Why wouldn't they take the car?
That's exactly what I thought too. And that was literally within my notes, right next to this whole idea. I said, but why wouldn't they take the car? Because the car was most likely very valuable. And just to ditch it,
right, even if it was just a stupid criminal that didn't have anything, they
would be like, I'm going to steal this 79 sports car.
Right. And I'm going to go joyriding in it, or I'm going to take it and I'm going to try to get away.
Or did they have a brain in one way or another and they were like, oh, if I take this car, I'm more easily identifiable?
I don't know. The more we go in depth into this without, any information pointing me in a totally opposite direction, this just seems too clean for your standard robbery. This seems like a
more
targeted attack. We throw the word professional around
yeah,
somebody hired a professional killer type thing.
Yeah, but that's not necessarily what I mean here.
That's not what I mean necessarily either when I use that term. But
so then I want to tell you something. Can I tell you this next thing?
Yeah.
So obviously Don had been talked to numerous times by reporters. He's been, interviewed. He's talked about the case. And he doesn't discount robbery. He doesn't. But something else that he's brought up that I found to be particularly interesting, and I'm wondering if maybe, John, you'll agree here and it'll kind of coincide with what you're thinking so far. He was thinking that maybe Lynn witnessed something that she should not have. And in that moment, whoever these people were, say this was a more professional, for lack of a better word, whatever they were doing, whether it be drugs, whether it be guns, whether it be something that they shouldn't have been doing, and maybe Lynn was in the wrong place at the wrong time and saw it, and these people acted quick and reacted, and then killed her and also said, you know what? She's with a small child.
Yeah.
As much as he couldn't even speak like a lot of words or anything at the time, they probably said, we're going to kill him as well to eliminate any witnesses to this. So was it like this bigger thing where she saw something she shouldn't have, and that's why it seems more clean?
I can get more in line with that than I can robbery.
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying and why you're believing that, but there's still, I will tell you, there's still a lot more to come with this. So.
All right. And I'll just say too, like in regards to the using the professional, adjective.
And no one can see, we're using air quotes every time that we say professional, but
yeah. So in terms of using that as like the adjective, I think what I'm trying to describe is that killing Lynn and Jeremy was the main motive.
Not anything
else. And whoever did this, that was their main goal.
So murder for the sake of murder.
Or to cover something up.
Okay. Yep.
And then you take all of the personal belongings and valuables to make it seem like robbery was the motive.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Just to kind of lead.
But I could be totally wrong, and whatever you're going to tell me may change my mind.
It might. I don't know. We'll see where you go with it in a little bit. But I will say that as of today, the motive has never 100% been nailed down, even though, there are indicators of at least 1 to 2, maybe even 2 to 3 different potential motives. Police have never, veered one way or another or stated like, this is definitely what we think. And there have been, videos done, more recent update articles done, and that's just like a common thing that police seem to say is like, we just can't nail down a motive. Like we're not, there's nothing that we can say 100%, this is what we believe, this is what seems to be the most true, because there's too many things that could lead you in other directions. And I think we've already learned that so far.
Right. Everybody knows where I stand now, so let's get into more information to see if I stay in the same spot.
Yeah.
If our listeners stay in the same spot, or if they think totally different from what I
Yeah, I'm curious. So after the first few months of this case kind of being plastered everywhere in the media, at least within the Columbus Dispatch, it seems that as time went on, reporting kind of began to dwindle. And roughly a decade went by before any new information came to light in this case. But it's reported in a Columbus Dispatch piece from March of 1989 that 3 years after Lynn and Jeremy were killed, so this would have been back in 1983, that someone actually attempted to use one of Lynn's credit cards to buy tickets for a concert at the Ohio Center. This charge was also said to be attempted over the phone, not in person, so it's not like anyone can say, oh, what did the person that tried to buy the tickets look like? It was an over-the-phone purchase. Authorities were obviously incredibly interested in this lead and were hoping that they might be able to find the person who tried to buy the tickets. And they've said publicly as well that they hoped to go to the concert and find the person who bought the tickets.
In my gut, the person that killed Lynn and Jeremy
isn't the one.
They did not hold on to these belongings, wait a distinct amount of time.
Wait 3 years.
Right, wait 3 years, and then be like, I'm going to go buy some concert tickets.
Yes, so what I was thinking was more along the lines of,
somebody found it.
Yes.
Even if it was dumped and nobody happened upon it for 3 years for some reason, somebody was like, oh, sick, a credit card. Let me see if I can buy something with it.
Exactly. And I think that maybe authorities weren't hoping that they would find the killers by finding these people at the concert.
We'll find out where they found the card.
Where they found the card. Did they find the purse? What did they do with it? Did they now have evidence that they could take it?
How long ago did you find it?
Exactly. But in an odd twist, the tickets were never actually sold to this person who tried to buy them. And I have no idea why or how this happened.
And just to bring us back to reality here, I was thinking off the bat, trying to buy a ticket because, Taylor Swift is all in the media right now.
Yes.
They're not trying to buy tickets off Ticketmaster.
Yeah. So, but what happened in the in-between of this is literally just a phone call. How did they, how could the ticket selling people have known that this wasn't Lynn?
How is this credit card still active?
Well, I mean, credit cards last for 5 years. So maybe she had gotten it recently. It was 1980 when they were killed, and then this happened in 1983. Maybe it was a new credit card. I don't know how long they were valid back in the 80s. If anybody knows that, I'd love to know.
Well, I'm just wondering, like, she's deceased. She was murdered.
I understand that, but how
Does
is
the
this
credit
person...
bureau not go through and...
Well, maybe that's how they found out that the credit card was used, but why is it that this person didn't actually buy the tickets? Did they chicken out? Did something happen? Did the purchase not go through?
Did
Was
they
the
require
credit
further
card
verification
canceled?
that they could not provide?
Exactly.
What's the billing address?
Yes, that's what I'm wondering. These are all things that could probably go into why the tickets didn't actually, like why the purchase didn't go through. But there's like so much behind the scenes that I wonder why. And, you know, authorities did say publicly, like, damn, we really wish that it did go through so that we could have tried to track this person down and at least find some more clues, because as of this point, there's really not much.
No. Something that popped into my head, too, like if this person had found the purse or the wallet.
Yes.
And they needed billing addresses, verification over the phone purchase.
Yep.
I mean, the whole wallet would be in there.
Probably a checkbook back in the 80s, those kinds of things. Yeah.
If this credit card was just found by itself or if this other stuff was found with it.
Well, that makes me, oh my God, we're just going to keep finding parallels between this and Sherry Magaro's case. But you remember they found her credit card leaning up against that stop sign or whatever?
Right.
Someone could have just literally, they could have been driving along, tossed her bag out, and then maybe things flew out of the wallet, flew out of everywhere. Right. And someone could have literally just found this leaning up against a stop sign or some random location.
Right. Maybe, you know, it was somebody doing manual labor and cleaning up a location that hadn't been cleaned in years, and it was just chucked out, and
that's all they found. But that's the thing that sucks, and I'm sure that's why investigators were so frustrated.
They can't get a hold of the person.
And they can't know what that person saw, where they found it, how they found it, what it looked like. Do they still have the card? Could there be DNA? Could there be prints? Could there be anything on it?
Could they track the phone number that was called into the business?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. And I wonder if that's something that they've looked into in recent years. But that was never stated.
Could have used a payphone.
Also
Back
true.
in the day, if you're using a fraudulent credit card, you may want to not call from your house.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. And we have learned that plenty of criminals like to use payphones. So who knows? But all right, you ready for some bombshells?
I'm ready.
Okay, so I'm going to drop some big info on you here. And this has to do with more sightings of Lynn and Jeremy the day they were killed. So far, the two sightings I provided to you earlier, the one at the bank and the one at the Woolco store, appeared to have been the only sightings that were released publicly for quite some time. And I said before, there's got to be more that they know. And there was. But 2016 is when this information is released. And that was in Holly Zachariah's reporting for the Columbus Dispatch. And she came out with like a lot of info from authorities. And from what I can tell, based on the research that I've done, it appears that this information was released at this point in 2016. Obviously, I don't have full access to all publications or archives or anything like that. Maybe some other tidbits were released earlier, but 2016 is the first time I'm seeing any of this stuff reported.
But it was learned prior to this.
Much earlier on. Yep.
Okay.
Also, I do just want to mention, again, back to Holly's reporting, but she has like this really great diagram and map of all the locations of where Lynn was seen, where her car was seen, all of these things. And for everyone listening, if you kind of want to follow along, I guess you kind of can as we go over this, a photo will be on our socials and our website, and I'll link to her article as well within our sources on our website, so you can just take a peek at that if you want to. But John, I want to give you the rundown first before you look at this map, because it will totally spoil you on some things if I have you look at this beforehand. But I just wanted to let everybody know that it is very comprehensive of all the sightings that day and the distances between them, the exact addresses, all of that. So you can get like a really good idea of, you know, all the spots that she hit that day. Okay, so we're going to back up a little bit. And obviously we already know, I've told you this probably 3 times already, Lynn left her house at 11. She was then seen at the bank depositing the checks at 11:15. Then she was seen at the Woolco store between 11:30 and 12. That had been the last of the sightings. Now, after this is where things start to get interesting, and where I think the start of what happened to both Lynn and Jeremy that day really began. So there were a couple of additional sightings of Lynn's car that afternoon, one of which was said to be roughly around 12:30 p.m., so only about a half hour to 30 minutes after Lynn was last seen in the Woolco store that morning or early in the afternoon. So this sighting was said to be along James Road and Main Street in Columbus, which was semi-nearby to East Main Street and that South Hamilton Road that we've talked about a few times. Also, this same sighting was from a man who was eating lunch at a restaurant situated on one of those intersecting roads, and he saw Lynn's 79 Mustang outside. Like we talked about before, because of the distinct nature of the car, this guy was like immediately intrigued by it and later knew that he'd seen it because of all of its unique features, and he knew to come forward. This witness later told police that when he spotted the car driving in front of the restaurant he was eating at, it was not Lynn driving. He spotted a black man driving the car and saw a white woman sitting in the passenger seat. Obviously, the fact that Lynn was not the person driving the car might be a little concerning, at least it was to me, but there's another comment from this witness that makes me believe that whoever was driving this car is the person that abducted Lynn and Jeremy and later killed them. And that's that quote, "The driver was slipping the clutch as if he didn't know how to drive it," end quote. If this person did not know how to drive a stick shift, why would he have ever been driving it unless he forced Lynn into the passenger seat? Mm-hmm. I know if it were me and I were being picked up by a friend or I was going with people somewhere and I didn't know how to drive a stick shift, I would not suggest driving that car.
Right.
I would never. So I think that this was a forced thing and that this wasn't just Lynn like meeting up with a friend and letting him drive her car around. But that's my 2 cents on it.
So just thinking back to the vehicle being found in like not the best area.
Yeah.
Thinking about, and this is total speculation and playing into the tropes of a housewife or a stay-at-home mom and stuff.
Yep.
Was there a toxicology report on the autopsy?
If there was, it has not been released or I haven't been able to find it.
I'm wondering could she have stopped to pick up drugs somewhere?
Interesting
Drug deal
point.
gone bad?
See, I don't think so. By all accounts, she was happy. She loved her life. I have not seen any comments about drug use, about alcohol use, about anything like that.
Strange, though, that a toxicology report was not put out and said, this is the cause of death. She was not sexually assaulted and no drugs were found in her system.
See, it's interesting, though, that you say that because I feel like that's much more common with more recent cases. If you think back, I've done a lot of older cases. I feel like I gravitate more towards like 70s, 80s, and 90s. And we almost never have a toxicology.
I suppose.
I wonder if that just wasn't commonplace.
I'm a child of the times, and nowadays, with more recent ones, it's, that's one of the staples of the autopsy that you're looking for.
Yeah, we just watched Unsolved Mysteries the other night, and the first episode, that was one of the first things, one of the first things in terms of the autopsy anyway, that they discussed was her toxicology being completely clear. Mm-hmm. But I'm just thinking back to like all this research that I've done, and I feel like I never hear about toxicology reports in these older cases.
It is interesting, though, that, again, she has somebody driving her car that clearly doesn't know how to drive a stick, at least proficiently.
I mean, if this guy can just see that from like in a restaurant, he's like, this guy does not know how to drive that.
Well, I'm assuming, you're probably at a restaurant, you're at an intersection.
Are you lurching?
They're at a red light.
Oh, could he stall? Could he stall out?
Maybe not stalled out, but, trying to go from first gear to second gear and whatever.
I can't drive a stick, so if I'm saying all wrong things, I apologize to everybody listening.
He could have stalled out, but if he's saying, that, what did he say, that they were grinding gears?
He said slipping the clutch.
Slipping the clutch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just another idea that popped into my head because you have
good. These are questions that you would ask because these aren't things that I've given you so far. It's a valid question.
And I think it's very interesting that, authorities are releasing more information. It seems like, at least, because, Holly's reporting has become so in-depth, and even this information is released when it hasn't been released in the past, or at least not easily accessible.
I think these are detectives that don't have a huge ego. I think they're saying, we've got nothing for, at that point, 36 years.
Right, but how is it that all this information has come out and still no mention of a toxicology report?
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if it wasn't commonplace in the 80s.
Maybe, but I find that odd.
Yeah, I find it odd too. I'm going to have to look into that. So,
yeah. And maybe it's something that they do know, and maybe there is something there, and maybe that's something they don't want to release because it could tie, or it could release too much.
Yeah.
That could create a bias in the public.
I think at the end of the day, I really feel like anything that they're not releasing is an integrity of the investigation thing. I think it's we need a big tip or we need a confession, and there have to be things like, say she had gone out and had a drink with someone or something, and they would know that she had a drink, and there would be that in the toxicology or something, just as an example, or say she had cocaine, or you don't know.
Or Quaaludes.
Yeah, and say someone was like, oh yeah, I met her at so-and-so bar, and is this the right term, took a bump? And then, is that how you would say
That's good enough.
Yeah. And then, we had 2 beers or something, then police might be able to say, okay, this is more accurate now. Obviously, this is not what happened, or at least I don't believe it is, but this is just an example of someone coming forward with information in a case and it matching up to something police have that has never been released publicly.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
All right, but there's more. There's more. I got more for
now
you.
You're adding in more that's making me think more that is changing my opinion a little bit.
Yeah, I had a feeling it might.
Knowing that somebody else was driving her car.
Oh, yeah,
is
that
enough
threw me
to
right
throw
off.
a wrench into my initial belief, but also maybe not, but continue on.
Okay, so there was another sighting that afternoon of Lynn's car, and this next one was said to be between noon and 1 p.m. And this was in, I think, a more residential type neighborhood that was nearby to the Woolco store that Lynn had been seen in just a half hour to an hour earlier. But the interesting thing about this sighting is that, again, Lynn wasn't the one driving her car. The woman who reported seeing the 79 Mustang in her neighborhood that afternoon stated that a black male was driving the vehicle. But she did see a white woman in the passenger seat of the car, same as the guy at the restaurant. But the most concerning part of her statement is that she, quote, added that a white woman in the passenger seat seemed to be leaning, perhaps slumped against the window, end quote.
Which is why I asked when the first guy saw her, was she alive in the car?
Yeah? You don't know. So that sighting was first. The sighting near the restaurant, that was around 11:45 noontime.
Yeah, we're talking 15 minutes later, though.
Correct. But I will say, so there's one typo that I noticed, and there's this comment on that diagram that I'll show you in a few minutes, and it says 11:45 p.m. was the sighting from the guy at the restaurant.
That's got to be a typo.
Which obviously is a typo, but then I'm like, so is 11:45 accurate or is 12:30 accurate? Because I've seen, some semblance of a variation there. So I just don't know.
Maybe it was 12:45.
I think at the end of the day, it's anywhere between noon and 1 is when these sightings seem to be.
I would guess it was a fat finger, and instead of 11:45 p.m., it was supposed to be 12:45 p.m. That
would be a good one, a good point, yeah, instead of... Because why would you say 11:45 p.m. if you meant to say a.m.? The A and the P are far away on the keyboard.
Right, it's easier to fat finger a 2
than it is a P versus an A.
You're also at the turnover 11:45 a.m. versus 12:45 p.m.
moving into the afternoon.
And if you were trying to say 12:45 p.m., it's easier to transpose it and say 11:45 p.m. by accident.
Exactly. So like I just said,
so we're saying 15-minute difference.
I think that these sightings, both outside the restaurant and within the neighborhood, were most likely, based on all other factors that we know, between 12:30 and 1.
Yes.
Seems most accurate.
Right.
Okay. What I haven't told you yet is that there was actually another sighting of Lynn prior to both of the sightings of her in the car with this unidentified black man. So let's backtrack just a little bit to noontime. After Lynn left the Woolco location, she was then seen at a Save Mart gas station located at 1055 South Hamilton Road in Columbus. And again, there's that South Hamilton Road. She literally was at the bank on that road. She went to the shopping center on that road. Now she's at the gas station on that road. So today, this location appears to actually house a Speedway gas station. So I think it seems to make sense that back in the day, it was just a different branded gas station. It's continued to stay a gas station throughout today. Lynn was seen there putting air in one of her tires right around noontime. Already, I think the time frame is starting to match up between when she was last seen at the Woolco, now when she's seen at the gas station. And the gas station was about 2 miles down the road from the Woolco, so about a 7-minute drive. Now, this witness who saw Lynn at the Save Mart gas station stated that she, quote, noticed 2 black men near the woman, one leaning on a white car. She thought it might have been a Camaro, and the other giving the woman grief, end quote. So, meaning that these two black men that Lynn was seen speaking with or in some sort of maybe argument with were, for some reason or another, giving her a hard time. This woman continued her statement and said, quote, "The girl didn't want to be involved in the conversation. She was shaking her head no," end quote. And according to this reporting in the Columbus Dispatch, these men became more confrontational, I would say, almost creating some kind of argument between themselves and Lynn, but for what reason, I have no idea. The woman who saw the altercation between the two became uneasy and decided to leave, and she didn't have any further details to share with police about what she'd seen that day, which I totally don't blame her for leaving, and I'm sure I would have done the exact same thing myself. And of course, hindsight is 2020. I'm sure this woman wishes she'd called police or done something or said something once she found out that Lynn and Jeremy were killed that same day. But the wild thing about this whole situation is that police even went on to hypnotize this lady upwards of 3 separate times because, I mean, obviously they wanted as much information out of her as they could get or were, able to try and get out of her. And with that, hoping they could figure out who these two men were. But that never panned out. It was completely unsuccessful, and authorities were no closer to finding these two men that Lynn was last seen with. Also, I did just want to mention that on the map from the Columbus Dispatch article, it shows one additional sighting listed as number 5 on that map, and it states, quote, "southbound on Santa Maria Lane to San Jose Lane, and then turn on to St. Christopher Lane," end quote. And I'm not 100% sure, but for obviously anyone that is following along with things and trying to map out when all these sightings were, I think that's the same sighting as the woman that saw Lynn in her neighborhood. So I just wanted to bring that up to avoid confusion if anyone's thinking I'm completely skipping over a sighting.
Okay, well, how about you avoid confusion some more and you send me
I'm sending it to you right now.
All right. I'm going to need a minute.
I know there's a lot of stuff to read on there. That's why I said I didn't want to send it to you before, because if you didn't know about certain things, you would be like, wait, hold on a second.
Okay. They leave the house 11 a.m., like you've said multiple times.
Yep. So the problem with this, though, I will say, is it's listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but they're not all in order because she did not go to the Save Mart first. She went to the bank. Then she went to the Woolco.
Yeah,
then
that's
she went
annoying.
to the Save Mart. That was a little confusing. If this person, though, that created, I don't know if it was Holly, Zachariah, or someone she works with at the Columbus Dispatch, but on here you can tell that once you get to number 4, you're looking chronologically. So John, like you said earlier about potentially fat fingering the 11:45 p.m. comment, it was probably 12:45 p.m. That would make perfect sense because that's in order of the time. Mm-hmm. In which these sightings were. So maybe then the first sighting was the woman in the neighborhood, and then the second sighting was the guy in the restaurant. I had them transposed in how I told you about them, but
right. And then you got to wonder, what's she doing in the neighborhood?
But she wasn't driving. So then what's this guy doing driving her around in this neighborhood?
You wonder, what was the conversation between these two black guys and Lynn?
Yeah, what were they saying to her?
What were they heckling her about? The scene just makes me think of John Wick, which he's, at a gas station with his really nice car. Mm-hmm. These punk gangsters are like, "Oh, sell me the car, blah, blah, blah." He's like, "It's not for sale." Yeah. If this report is correct, these black guys had a white Camaro. Mm-hmm. They probably really liked the Mustang. Maybe there was some type of talk about the car.
Yeah. Maybe.
Who knows?
Well, and then that goes back to the whole thing before, like I mentioned, was she targeted because of her
because
car,
of the car,
but not necessarily for money? Was it just...
Well, do you know the story of John Wick?
They kill his puppy.
Yes, but they follow him because of his car.
Oh, so maybe that, yeah. And then maybe if she were in a more secluded area after the fact, that's when the attack took place. But then why? Just to take her money?
I don't know, to not take the car?
Exactly. If that's what the whole altercation at the gas station was about.
Yeah.
What could have been going on there? What was happening between them? Obviously, I don't blame that woman for leaving. I'm a nervous Nelly.
No,
I would have been out of there
don't.
like a bat out of hell because I would think that I could get involved in something and I wouldn't want to be there. But, I just wonder if she had maybe even stuck around or put her window down if she was in her car or something, if she could have heard any of it. Mm-hmm. I don't know. And maybe that's why authorities hypnotized her, because they wanted to see if she had in fact heard stuff like that.
Like a repressed memory or something.
Yeah, and it wasn't at the forefront of her mind.
Yeah.
But I just think at the end of the day, like, the most important thing to come out of these sightings is that these two men are more than likely
Yes, so
involved.
we now have potential suspects.
Uh-huh.
You assume that the two black males were together.
Mm-hmm.
So our main suspect at this time either owns or owned a white Camaro, if that's accurate, or was friends with the person that owned a white Camaro.
Correct, yeah. And something else to just comment on is the fact that both of these sightings did not state that there was more than one black male in the car. There was just one black male driving each time that they were seen. Yeah. So where'd the friend go? Because we know that there were two individuals.
Well, if they had their own car.
Yeah, so maybe
the
were...
friend was following the vehicle and the Cobra stood out, but maybe the Camaro didn't.
This made me think of kind of one of your theories in Amy Baker's case about how you thought maybe, you know, they stopped on the side of the road and then you have these two friends that like decide to do something messed up. Is that what happened here?
Maybe.
Because you didn't have anything like that in her case to really like set your sights on to say that could have been what happened.
Yeah.
But is that what happened here? You know that there were two people. You know that they were bothering her. You know she seemed uncomfortable.
But I don't think that if both the guys at this gas station were heckling her, I don't think that one of them had a problem that the other one wanted to go after her. If anything, it was both of them.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was both of them. They planned it, and then the other person in the Camaro followed.
Yeah.
And picked up the other guy after the car was dumped, maybe.
Okay, so there's another sighting that will probably make you believe that that's the truth, because there was this sighting, and I don't know exactly what time these individuals saw this, but you remember how we were talking about where the vacant lot was, where the car was found before?
It wasn't in the best area.
Yeah, but there were things around. There was an apartment complex and a liquor store and a restaurant and all these other places. Well, apparently there was a couple that I assume at some point had looked out their window in the apartment complex, which I think was either across from it or right next to the lot. And they allegedly saw a black man leaving Lynn's car. Like, I don't know if they just caught him, like, as he was, like, walking out of the car and, like, shutting the door behind him. But they saw him leaving her car, walk across the lot, and get into a white car.
Yeah, of course.
The white Camaro. I mean, it all matches up perfectly.
So these are the suspects.
They have to be.
And
100% they have to be.
If they, I mean, you think of a bad area, you think of Columbus, you think of, you know, where the vehicle was left, whatever. Could there be a gang culture around there, whatever? You have these two guys heckling this woman that's with a young child. She's clearly not interested in being involved in this conversation at all. Could she have said something that pissed them off or offended them?
Yep.
And they were like, no, this ain't going to happen. You know,
how fucked
maybe
up, though,
followed her.
With a child.
Right. They followed her the next time she stopped, whether it be at a stop sign or a light or something.
Yep.
Maybe in a secluded area, force themselves inside the car, push her over to the passenger seat.
So just to counteract that a little bit, there were comments from her family where they said, you have to think, too, because, and they've said this as well, Lynn's dad was a cop.
Right, she's the daughter of a cop.
She's smart. She knows how, not that people who aren't, you know, family members of police officers aren't smart, but you're taught that. You're taught to be vigilant and to pay attention to these things. They said she locked her doors. They said that she would have fought back. They said that she knew how to be safe, that she knew, you know, just all the different ways to protect herself and to protect, obviously, the child that she is with.
Where was the next stop that she was supposed to go to after the Woolco? She went to the gas station, obviously.
I think
to put
that
air
was
in the tires, but then she was just going home?
I think so. I think putting the air in the tires was just like, I don't know if it was a detour or something, but her plan, and it was said that her plan was to go to the bank and go and get shower curtains and like other things for her bathroom. And that was it. Those were her plans.
Yeah.
So I would assume if she had skipped maybe putting the air in her tires, like, I don't know, maybe she, I don't know, cars didn't alert like that, did they, with like low tire pressure?
She might have had a slow leak.
It's
also a change in temperature where,
yeah,
you know, you start losing air pressure as it gets colder.
Yeah.
Because the rubber constricts and stuff. But I understand that she, you know, she would have been extra vigilant compared to your average person. She would have locked her doors and stuff, but she also may have been frazzled by this interaction.
That is very true.
She got in her car and she just freaking screwed.
Yeah.
because clearly she wants nothing to do with these two guys.
Mm-hmm.
Why would she ever allow one of them in her car?
Exactly, she wouldn't.
So, what location were they able to forcibly enter her vehicle or catch her off guard, kill her, and then take possession of her vehicle without anybody seeing? Because clearly somebody was watching at the gas station, even though this lady left, but she saw at least some of it. You got to assume there's an attendant in there. There's constantly people to and from the gas station.
Yep.
There had to be another stop somewhere, or she had to have stopped and her car wasn't locked, or he carjacked her and he had a gun.
All right. So I'm going to give a real life example here of how I can agree with your comment about her being frazzled and maybe not thinking about her normal things that she would do to protect herself. So I don't think I've talked about this on the podcast. Obviously, John, we've talked about this plenty, but I had a very interesting interaction with an individual at a post office. And this person reacted to something that the individual working at the post office said and basically like blew up in the middle of the post office, like flipping out, swearing, threatening, just acting crazy and scaring the literal shit out of me. And in that moment, I was shaking. I couldn't think about like what I was going to do next. This person made it seem like, he could potentially have access to weapons. Like he was just saying things that made me scared for my safety. And finally, once I was done with my transaction within the post office, I don't think I've ever run so fast to my car, got in, booked it. But I'll tell you, I was not paying attention to anything around me. My goal in that moment was get in the car, drive away. So in that moment, she absolutely could have felt like that. Get in the car, drive. You're not thinking about locking your doors. You're not thinking about where you're going next. Literally, I wasn't even familiar with the area that I was in. I've been there like twice in my life. And I was like, I'm just driving. I'm going right. Hopefully I find where I need to go. Right. And obviously today, I can pull up a GPS, like once I felt safer, whatever. But I can totally see everything you've ever learned, you've ever been taught, completely going out the window, because in that moment, the only thing in your head is get away from the threat.
Right.
So I can absolutely see that. And maybe she just was unprepared for them following her. Because I'll tell you, if that person had followed me, I don't know what the hell I would have done. And,
run them over.
Right? I mean, there are probably multiple things I could have done, but who knows
and
what you would do in the moment.
Automatically when you put the car in drive and you drive now.
Yes, very different today. Right. But it's just the mindset is not different. It's that adrenaline's pumping, you're scared, you just don't know what's going to happen. What you think that
you would do, you may not do in that type of situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now we have two suspects.
Yes.
I understand that the one witness to this conversation that happened had been, hypnotized and everything. Did they ever get a sketch of these suspects?
You're right on target, John. You're
trying
good.
to bring us back.
You're good.
Bringing
yes.
us back.
So I will say, I don't know which witness gave this description or what, but the only things that we know are that there were two black men and that the one man that was driving Lynn's car was said to have facial hair and also had like messy, bushy hair. And then something interesting that Holly Zachariah said was that he could have potentially been wearing a toboggan. But I don't really know exactly what that would have meant for like the 1980s, what that would look like or exactly what that is. But it was something that I wanted to bring up because it was a descriptor. Like maybe you knew someone that wore that back then?
I mean, when I think of a toboggan, I think of a friggin' wooden sled.
Okay, so maybe imagine if I'm over here pronouncing it wrong.
I'm guessing it's like a toque.
Yeah, but that's see, I wouldn't call it that either. I would call it a beanie.
Would you call it a balaclava? Maybe
no, that's over his face. Hold on.
I gotta look up toboggan hat.
Yeah, so I'll read the quote for you exactly in this article.
Oh, it's a friggin' beanie with a pom-pom on the top.
Yeah, it says, quote, and the witnesses each had some consistency in the descriptions of the men they saw, commenting similarly that one of them had noticeably unkempt, bushy hair and perhaps wore a toboggan over it and facial hair, end quote.
So when you look up toboggan hat, it's like a knitted wool cap with a fluffy pom-pom on the top.
So it's a beanie.
It's a beanie.
It's a winter hat.
Yes.
That is the most bizarre term to use for that.
Well,
but all right.
Funny enough, a toboggan hat is spelled Toboggan.
Correct. That's how I have it. Is it spelled differently if it's a sled? I almost said sleigh. We're in Santa Claus land over here.
No, it's spelled the same way.
That's weird.
I don't get it.
Anybody know why?
Yeah, talk to us, people.
We want to know. Why is it called a toboggan if it's a beanie? And why is it called a toboggan if it's a sled?
Yeah.
This is very confusing. Is this more English language stupidity?
Probably.
Yeah. So basically, this is all that we have for a description of these men. And what I think is, okay, authorities gave so much info. Were they ever able to get a composite sketch drawn of these guys? Because I've never seen one released publicly, and I would love to see that released to the public, because I think that will help you identify these people.
I thought when I asked the question, you were like, here it is.
No.
Oh, there isn't one.
There's no sketch. I have not been able to find a sketch, and I would love for authorities to release a sketch. I think that would be massive. Sure, you can say to someone like, oh yeah, this person wore a beanie with a pom-pom on it and had bushy, messy hair and facial hair, but that could be 90% of people.
Right.
So there's got to be more.
I think it's more you want to think of 2 black males, one owned a white Camaro at the time.
Yeah.
In that general area.
Exactly. Yeah, I think those are really all that
those are your
anybody
sticking
has
factors.
Yeah, this is all anybody has to go off of, because there is no sketch to say, well, I knew Joe Schmo and he drove a white Camaro and he had messy hair and facial hair and, I mean, maybe it's not him. I don't know. But then if you had a sketch to compare him to and be like, oh, wow, he looks like that sketch too. Now I'm going to go to authorities.
I think, that would definitely help.
Yeah.
We may never get that. But the facts that we do know is that at least at the time, these 2 men were in the possession of a white Camaro.
Yes. Yeah.
Did they own it?
Or a car that
maybe
looked
not.
like a Camaro. She said it might be. I don't know how many cars looked
white
like
sports
that.
car,
but
maybe.
Yeah.
But who knows? Community in that area may not want to come forward with information anyway. So people may very well know it and just not want to say.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that, because I was just about to bring that up, how it's like, how is it that we have so many sightings of Lynn and Jeremy and her car, and now these black men that were both at the gas station that were seen by 2 separate people driving her car? We have so many sightings of everything but the important thing of what happened to them.
And where it happened.
When did it happen? Where did it happen? It's the middle of the freaking day.
Right.
If she's last seen at the very latest with these men, or at least one of these men, at 1 p.m., and then if we're taking the very earliest sighting of when that car was placed in that lot at 3:30, there are 2.5 hours in the middle of the day. Where the hell could they have gone where they were able to quietly, discreetly, and without anyone noticing them, murder 2 people? How?
Yeah, I'm thinking that if this suspect forcibly got into the vehicle, whether it be through the driver's side or the passenger side, essentially forced Lynn to drive to a particular location, killed her inside the vehicle.
But there was no struggle in the car.
I don't know. It's hard to think that in the middle of the day, without bringing her to the inside of a location or something, it just seems more feasible to bring her to a location where nobody, would see them, do it in the car. Who knows? I mean,
or maybe there's
so
someone out there that knows something that's been too afraid to say it.
Yeah, but you got to think too, like at the time, like in the early stages of this episode, I'm thinking somebody walked up behind her, strangled her.
Yeah.
That's why there was no struggle inside the vehicle.
And now
you know that this suspect was in the vehicle at the same time as her. She was in the passenger seat, maybe already dead. But there was a strangulation
that had to have happened.
That happened,
somewhere.
And you're not going to not fight and flail and kick your legs and try to survive.
Absolutely. And we've talked about this before. I don't know if we've talked about it specifically on the podcast, but I know when we chat about cases like Adnan Syed's and Heyman Lee, how people have this misconception of how long it actually takes to strangle someone. Unless this person is so strong they can hold every one of your extremities so you can't move, or there's more than one person, you're more than likely going to be trying to grasp onto things around you and try and save your own life. So the lack of a struggle makes me question things. But then again, like what we talked about before regarding them not having any like bodily substances or debris or grass or dirt or anything on their clothing, so then they're not on the ground. So like, where is this happening? And how is it, again, that nobody saw it?
Yeah.
It's just so strange.
I thought that I was kind of on the right track of nailing down like a route
to go down
to bring this investigation.
Yeah.
But now knowing all of these sightings, the suspects that are involved, and all the other factors that we've learned, I feel like I'm more or less back at stage one. Obviously, we need to identify, or authorities need to identify
these men. Yeah.
But motive now is totally up in the air.
Absolutely. And I think that's why now that they have all of this, and that's probably why in the beginning they were like, no, we can't nail it down 100% because they knew this stuff. There is so much that could lead you down multiple different paths of what the motive was here.
Yeah.
All right. So in recent years, there has been some big news that's come out in regards to trying to track down these men. So remember how we talked earlier about the car potentially being wiped for prints, or maybe the killer wore gloves? Well, apparently, whatever they did wasn't totally good enough because DNA was actually found within the car. And I'm not sure exactly where in the car they were able to gather these samples from. Maybe in the beginning they said they couldn't find anything on the sheet or towel because they didn't have DNA capabilities back in 1980. But maybe they've retested those things in recent years and were able to gather some sort of physical evidence from it. But there were 2 good samples that they were able to get from whatever they gathered the samples from in the car. And it was said that these 2 samples belonged to 2 different men. And not only that, there was 1 hair sample found in the car as well that did not belong to Lynn or Jeremy, and was said to belong to a black male. Which again, these 2 things, the DNA from the 2 different men, the hair belonging to a black man. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that these 2 individuals are the people that were involved here. I don't think you can't convince me otherwise.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would dispute that at this point.
Unfortunately, though, even with these good samples, authorities still have not been able to match anyone in the system to either DNA sample so far. As of 2019, the DNA was being retested with a company known as Advanced DNA, but since that point, I haven't seen any update articles in terms of the DNA evidence and its testing, but for all we know, answers could be right around the corner in this case. All right, so from here, I wanted to touch on something that I found from that same Web Sleuths user earlier. Not only did this person go ahead and go to the Columbus Library, get all those archive records, but they brought something to my attention, or I guess to anybody's attention that's reading the thread, something that is somewhat intriguing. And that was actually another case of a young mother and her son who were killed just 10 months after Lynn and Jeremy were killed. And at first, the similarities kind of shocked me. So I wanted to give you a little rundown on that case and kind of compare and contrast and see what you might think about a potential connection between the 2. So on Sunday, September 13th, 1981, Janice Beidelman and her 18-month-old or potentially 20-month-old son, I've seen it reported 2 different ways, but her son Brandon left their home to go visit with Janice's mother-in-law and Brandon's grandmother. After their visit, Janice called her husband Stanley early that evening to let her know she finished up with her visit with her in-laws and she'd be stopping by the grocery store quick and then she'd be on her way home. However, when the 2 never arrived home that night, obviously, her husband became worried, and then around 10 or 10:30 that evening, Stanley finally called police and reported the 2 missing. The following day, Monday, September 14th, 1981, both Janice and Brandon's bodies were found floating in a creek near the Agler Road Bridge and Sunbury Road. According to 10 TV, quote, "Her car was beneath the bridge. There's a service road that leads to the creek, and the suspect found that and drove down," end quote. And just to note, authorities did mention that they believed there were witnesses who saw Janice's car on that service road, but no one came forward when they first saw it because nothing seemed weird or suspicious at the time. After authorities began working the case, they discovered that Janice hadn't actually been attacked where her car and body were later found. It was determined that Janice had originally been attacked on Putter Avenue in Columbus, which was approximately 7.5 miles or a 15-minute drive south of where her body was later discovered. Authorities knew that she'd been attacked in this place because several items belonging to her were found there, including some of her jewelry. And there was even a witness statement later reported from someone who lived along Putter Road that stated, quote, "All she said, it was such a wicked scream, like she was really being hurt, real wicked," end quote. So, let's begin by discussing the similarities between these two cases. First and foremost, the victims were all incredibly close in age. Lynn was 23 and her nephew Jeremy was just 2.5. Janice was 21 and her son was 18 or 20 months old. Both of their autopsies concluded nearly identical causes and manners of death, and interesting fact, it was also the same coroner who completed all 4 of their autopsies. We know Lynn was strangled with a thin cord and Jeremy was suffocated. Janice was said to have been strangled as well, and Brandon was also suffocated. Both were believed to have been killed in different locations to where their bodies would later be found, and both of their bodies were discovered within a day of them going missing. Also, I did want to mention that the locations of where they were both found were not very far from each other either. Yes, it is definitely different that Lynn and Jeremy were found in their car and Janice and Brandon were found in a creek, but the distance between where they were abducted and where their bodies were later discovered was only about 11.5 miles or a 17-minute drive. Any thoughts so far, John?
What kind of car was Janice driving?
Very good. I was going to bring that up in a minute. It was a 1974 Chevy Vega.
Okay, so not of the caliber
Yeah.
of a 79 Cobra.
Yep.
But just thinking, we have similarities here. How far do they go?
Mm-hmm.
Manner of death is intriguing.
Agreed.
That they're both the same ages, both a mother and son, or mother and possibly son if you didn't know them. So it is interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, you would think that the person who killed Lynn and Jeremy could have killed Janice and her son.
Definitely. There's enough similarities, at least so far. And that's why I said, when I first heard about that case, I was like, wow, what? There are crazy similarities here.
Right. And within a year of the 2 murders.
Yeah.
And within close proximity.
Definitely. Yep. So all things are pointing to the potential of a connection. However, as I dug deeper, I definitely did find differences. Something that I just mentioned a minute ago, and that's the location of where their bodies were left. Lynn and Jeremy were left in a parking lot with the victims left in the car. Yet Janice and Brandon's bodies were dumped in the creek and the car was just right up the road.
Yep.
So why not leave them in the car? Why put them in the creek? That's a big difference to me.
Unless the killer thought that there may have been, some type of evidence left on them that the creek could wash away.
That's a good point. Yeah. Okay. Didn't think about that.
But then I'm thinking also, as far as another difference, if Janice's property was found where she was attacked, and it doesn't seem like Lynn's property was ever found outside of that credit card.
Correct, yeah.
That's another difference, right?
Yeah, yep, I agree. Something else was also what you had brought up just a minute ago, John, and that was regarding the difference in their cars. Janice's car was a little bit older, like you said, wasn't as flashy, that fancy brand new sports car type deal. So, maybe she wasn't targeted specifically because of the vehicle she was driving, which then, again, could be a difference here, which is something, that could go into motive, but who knows?
Yeah. But continue with the differences because
okay, so
I have a feeling it's going to kind of
we're going to veer off course. Yeah. So in terms of injuries, within Janice's autopsy, it's discovered that she had been beaten prior to her strangulation. And that was not anything that was indicated in Lynn's autopsy at all. But the biggest difference, in my opinion, has to do with one big thing.
Sexual assault.
Correct. Janice was sexually assaulted and her body was left in the creek nude. This is a major difference to me because more often than not, I feel like sexual assault is a motive in and of itself. And then
I agree. And then sometimes murder just follows suit.
Yeah, and
as
then
a way to cover it up.
Yeah, and then I think about the 2 boys, and I guess my whole thing there is I think maybe it could still go back to what we were talking about earlier, where it's like to remove a witness, even though they're young, even though they can't really talk very well. They're with these female guardians. They've witnessed this thing now, and who knows what they could potentially remember later. And in the killer's mind, it's, I just need to eliminate a witness. Yeah. And there's no motive outside of that, except for that elimination factor.
Yeah.
Is how I would see it there. So I think the two boys could be more similar, but I just think that the sexual assault has completely thrown me off, because assaulting someone in that way, leaving their body nude, putting her in the water, like all of those things are just so very different than.
Just another thing that comes to mind too is the location of where the 4 killings took place.
Yeah.
It seems as though Lynn and Jeremy's were in more of a residential area, whereas Janice and Brandon's was down a service road, under a bridge, near a creek, potentially more secluded. Maybe the sexual assault took place in that case because it could.
Speaking of, I actually do have like an overhead view of that area, so you can see the difference. It is very secluded, in my opinion. Anyway.
Yeah, so, I mean, that could have been just an opportunistic factor of the overall murder.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if that was the case, because this, like, as you look at this photo, you'll see that it's definitely secluded. It was that, I think it's Alum Creek. It's over by that Sunbury Road area. And, I mean, you have to, like, go through a more, like, heavily populated area to get to it. But, like they said, they found this service road. I can't even see the service road on the map.
Right, service road is usually like this dirt road, or not like it's not a traveled road regularly. It's
it's like a random
specifically
path
to go down somewhere to do something.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, this is a very secluded area where something like that could, where something like that could take place. So, yeah, I mean, maybe the sexual assault was strictly because of location.
Yeah. We bring in, this other case, and I'm just as far up in the air with that one as I am with Lynn and Jeremy's. Yeah,
I completely agree. And I think with this case, or even these two cases together, and in particular, I don't think there's no theories here. There's no theory outside of these two men were involved in Lynn and Jeremy's case. And if you're on the side of there potentially being a connection here between these two cases, then these two people could also be involved in the murders of Janice and Brandon.
Right.
And I think, maybe I'll do a future episode on Janice and Brandon's cases and really, dive deeper into those, see if there are other suspects that have been brought up, and, we can kind of, dissect it and work through that to see.
Right, because it's also an unsolved case.
It is, yeah. So I think that's something that would be, well, let us know. I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, like, would you guys want to hear that? Even though, like, John already kind of knows a portion of that case now, like, is there more that you guys would want us to dive into and work through with that case to see if there are more similarities than we initially believe now?
Or even with just the information that we've provided so far.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on it?
Yeah, I'd love to know that for sure. Because there are definitely things that for me stood out as, wow, this is shocking. These cases are so similar. And then there were things that were like, oh, I really don't know. But then again, like, this is the good thing about, like, having these conversations is John and I can go back and forth, and he can play devil's advocate to the things that I say and vice versa, which can hopefully help us kind of decipher these things and at least bring up ideas that maybe if authorities ever hear this, then,
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem when you're looking at something just by yourself and you don't have somebody else to knock it around with.
Yeah.
You can easily talk yourself out of whatever it is you had your mind set on before.
Yeah.
And without bouncing it around and getting other people's perspective. And I think this is in part kind of what we do. We have these conversations together, but then we kick it out to you guys that are all listening who may have a totally different take on it. And then when we see what you guys are thinking, it may change our perspective that we had during the course of recording the episode.
Yeah, for sure. So again, and I just think with this episode as well, in terms of questions we're left with, we have 100 million. I mean, we've literally asked the questions completely as we've gone through.
Yeah, there's far too
this
many
whole
to list,
case. There's way too many.
It would just be redundant to
yeah, it'd be a rehash of pretty much everything that we've discussed already in this episode. So again, we want to hear from you guys. We want to know what you think about Lynn and Jeremy's case. We want to know what you think about Janice and Brandon's case. If you think there's a connection, and of course, if you know anything about either of them, come forward. Lynn Vest and Jeremy Pickens were so loved and did not deserve to leave this earth at such young ages. Lynn loved staying at home with her son, and her family was her entire world. She was kind and calm and was an incredible mother and aunt. According to his mother, Jeremy was the sweetest little boy who was obsessed with ducks and riding his tricycle. His mother, Cheryl, was pregnant prior to Jeremy's death, and his sibling was never able to meet him. Don's heart was absolutely shattered after the loss of his daughter and grandson. He so desperately wanted justice and still holds out hope today that they will find the monsters that took them from him. Cheryl, on the other hand, has given up hope that they'll ever find justice for her sweet little boy and her loving sister. But the whole reason we're here talking about them, as well as Janice and Brandon, is because they deserve to be remembered. They deserve to be talked about and should never be forgotten, which was one of Don's biggest fears for his daughter and his grandson. He told the Columbus Dispatch, quote, "People don't want to talk to you about it. They don't know what to say. But they're still alive to us today. They always will be. They lived, and we don't want people to forget that." There's currently a $5,000 reward being offered by Crime Stoppers for information in Jeremy and Lynn's case. So if you know anything about the murders of Lynn Vest and Jeremy Pickens, please contact Detective Gillette at 614-645-4447 or Crime Stoppers at 614-461-8477. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at wicked.deeds.podcast and on Twitter at wickeddeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.